is the greatest aviation mystery of all time.
Malaysia 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9.
How can a Boeing 777 simply vanish without a trace?
11 years after Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 vanished from radar,
it vanishes from radar. That is basically where the mystery begins.
With 239 souls on board, the world remains haunted by one of aviation's greatest mysteries.
Malaysia Airlines confirms it has lost contact with a plane carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew members.
Despite the largest and most expensive search in history, the Boeing 777's final resting place was never found.
Guided by the scans, the team investigates 80 locations in detail, but finds no trace of MH370.
Leaving families in agonizing limbo and fueling a decade of theories. Now, a renewed search, led by advanced underwater drones, has been launched, and a prominent aviation engineer is finally cracking the case, pointing investigators toward a new, promising area of the vast Indian Ocean. Think about any normal night. People finishing work, heading home, or in this case, heading to the airport. That was the scene on 8th March 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 was a routine red-eye, full of 239 people bound from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The aircraft, a Boeing 777, was one of the most trusted airliners in the sky. At 0041, it roared down the runway and climbed into the humid Malaysian night. For the first 40 minutes, everything seemed as it always is on a long-haul flight. Lights dimmed, passengers settled, and the captain made his last routine call to air traffic control. Good night, Malaysian 370. It was 1:19. Controllers in Malaysia handed the flight over to their Vietnamese counterparts as the jet crossed into new airspace. That handover is routine. It happens dozens of times every hour around the world. When the Vietnamese controllers tried to acknowledge MH370, they were met with silence. At first, the assumption was simple: a radio fault, a fleeting glitch. But the silence stretched on. Minutes became agonizing, and then something even stranger was revealed. While civilian radar screens showed nothing, military radar in Malaysia was tracking an aircraft that did not follow the flight's filed route. After its last known radio call, the jet, for reasons that remain unexplained, performed a sudden, sharp maneuver. It swung back westwards, making what looked like a U-turn over the Malay Peninsula. This was no casual deviation. The jet tracked northwest, sweeping over the Strait of Malacca, and was last seen on military radar at 2:14, heading west over the Andaman Sea, direction utterly different from its planned track to Beijing. The question that has haunted investigators, families, and the public ever since is simple and terrible. Why? In the early chaotic hours, nobody had the full picture. The world watched as international search teams concentrated where they believed the plane should have been, the South China Sea, between Malaysia and Vietnam. Dozens of ships and aircraft from more than 24 nations poured resources into searching for wreckage, oil slicks, or life rafts. The effort was colossal, public, and urgent. Yet day after day, they found nothing. No debris, no signal, no hint of what had happened to an aeroplane with hundreds aboard. It felt to many like a cosmic failure. In our wired, tracked era, how could a modern jet simply vanish? Then, hours after the disappearance, a subtle but crucial clue came to light. The aircraft had been communicating, not by voice, but by machine. Brief data exchanges with a satellite, known as automated electronic handshakes, continued for hours. These pings were not the kind of message you can listen to. They were heartbeat-like confirmations that the aircraft's satellite terminal was still powered and responding. In total, those pings continued for almost 7 hours after MH370's last radio contact. That fact alone changed the scale of the puzzle. The plane had not crashed immediately, but had stayed aloft, traveling thousands of kilometers across a vast and empty ocean. Those satellite replies traced an immense, invisible arc across the planet. Analysts marked that curve on maps and called it the seventh arc. It represents the last line, the final sweep on which the aircraft must have been somewhere before it ran out of fuel. The arc directed investigators to a remote and forbidding part of the southern Indian Ocean, far from the search's initial focus. But these pings and the military radar that showed the strange turn were not obvious to the teams racing in the first hours. For a time, the entire world was looking for the plane in the wrong place. What followed was one of the largest multinational search operations in history. Ships, aeroplanes, satellites, deep-sea vessels, and specialists from many countries combing an oceanic desert. The emotional landscape was as vast as the physical one. Families watched in bewildered grief as the hunt stretched from routine rescue into a slow, grinding mystery. Conspiracy theories flourished in the vacuum of facts. Governments exchanged cautious statements and, at times, conflicting accounts. Experts passed radar tracks, satellite logs, and aircraft systems for the faintest hint of motive or cause. So, the world now knew the general area where MH370 must have ended its journey, somewhere in the vast, remote, and brutally fierce southern Indian Ocean. This wasn't just any part of the ocean. This was one of the most isolated places on the planet, with waves that could tower over houses and depths that crushed the soul. The search zone was a staggering 1,800 kilometers off the coast of Western Australia. And so began one of the most expensive, complex, and ultimately frustrating underwater searches in human history. Led by Australia, a massive official operation swung into action. The operation involved specialized ships trailing sophisticated sonar equipment that was lowered on long cables, miles down to the seabed. They were methodically scanning the ocean floor, meter by meter, in what can only be described as a grueling maritime grid pattern. For nearly 3 years, this search continued. The numbers involved are almost too large to comprehend. They scoured an area of 120,000 square kilometers. To put that in perspective, that's nearly as large as the country of England. The cost ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And what did they find? After all that time, all that technology, and all that hope, nothing. Not a single piece of the aircraft was identified. In January 2017, with no new leads to follow and with over $200 million spent, the official search was suspended. The ocean, it seemed, had won. But the story didn't end there. A glimmer of hope emerged in the form of a private cutting-edge company called Ocean Infinity. In early 2018, they offered to take up the hunt on a no-find, no-fee basis. This meant they would only get paid if they successfully found the wreckage. It was a huge gamble, and it captured the world's attention all over again. Their approach was different. Instead of slow, towed equipment, they used a fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles, essentially incredibly smart robot submarines that could roam the deep ocean freely, mapping the seabed with incredible detail. They moved faster and could access even more treacherous terrain. For months, their robots glided through the crushing darkness, scanning an additional 25,000 square kilometers. The tension was obvious. Everyone was waiting for that one ping, that one image that would solve the mystery. But once again, the ocean gave up no secrets. Ocean Infinity's mission, like the official search before it, ended in heartbreak. No wreckage, no answers. Behind all these technical searches and these mind-boggling numbers, it is crucial to remember the real human heart of this tragedy. For the families of the 239 people on board, each new search was not just a news story. It was a roller coaster of agonizing hope. Grace Nathan, whose mother was on the flight, voiced a feeling shared by so many, saying, "We need to know what happened. We need to bring them home." It's a simple, desperate plea that cuts through all the complexity. Another relative, Jaquita Gonzalez, whose husband was a crew member, summed up the endless pain of not knowing, stating, "It's a torture that just doesn't end." These words are a stark reminder that this isn't just a technical puzzle or an aviation mystery. It is a story of profound loss, a wound that cannot heal because the most fundamental question, where, remained unanswered. For over a year, the search of the southern Indian Ocean had yielded nothing. It was the most expensive underwater hunt in history, and it had found no plane. It was a mystery that seemed like it might never be solved. But then, the ocean itself began to speak. It started to send messages, washing up on distant shores thousands of miles away. The first and most crucial message arrived on the 29th of July, 2015, on the island of Réunion, a French territory in the western Indian Ocean. A man walking on the beach found a strange, curved piece of grey debris covered in barnacles. It was a flaperon, a part of a plane's wing. And after careful analysis, French authorities confirmed the unthinkable. It was from MH370. This was the first physical proof that the flight had indeed ended in the water. But Réunion was nowhere near the main search zone. Over the following months and years, more of these silent witnesses washed up. More pieces of debris were found on the coasts of Tanzania, Mozambique, and Madagascar. All of them were confirmed to be from the missing Boeing 777. So, how did pieces of the plane end up in Africa when the search was focused near Australia? This is where the fascinating science of oceanography comes in. Experts from agencies like Australia's CSIRO got to work. They studied the ocean currents, the winds, and the weather patterns of the Indian Ocean. They then created complex computer models, essentially tracing the path backwards from the beaches where the debris was found. It was a bit like dropping a leaf in a river and working out where it started its journey based on the flow of the water. This drift analysis proved that the debris could only have come from one general area, the southern part of the 7th arc, the very same zone identified by the satellite pings. It was a stunning confirmation. The science was telling them they had been looking in the right place all along. But while these broken pieces told investigators where, they revealed almost nothing about why. The debris closed one door of the mystery, but it slammed open several others. Why was the plane flown so far off course? Who was at the controls? Why were all the communication systems deliberately switched off? The condition of the debris showed no signs of an in-air explosion, but it couldn't explain the human actions behind this tragedy. These silent witnesses from the deep carried no answers about the final moments in the cockpit, the intentions of the pilot, or the suffering of the passengers. They were a crucial clue, but they only deepened the central haunting question. What on earth happened aboard Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. For years, the search for MH370 felt like looking for a needle in a haystack the size of an ocean. And despite all the technology and all the money spent, the needle remained hidden. But what if everyone was looking in the wrong part of the haystack? What if a simple, overlooked detail from classic aviation could change everything? This is exactly the breakthrough claimed by a seasoned expert who has lived and breathed aeroplanes for his entire career, Ismail Hamad, the chief engineer for Egypt Air. As a man with decades of experience maintaining and understanding these complex machines, Hamad looked at the mystery not just as a satellite data problem, but as a piloting problem. His hypothesis centers on one critical, and he believes forgotten, piece of equipment: the humble magnetic compass. He asked a very simple question. What if someone was flying the plane, manually, without the autopilot? In that situation, they'd be relying on the gyro-stabilized magnetic compass to steer. And that, he argues, is where a tiny but catastrophic error was introduced. This is where we get into the concept of compass drift. You see, there's a difference between true north, which is at the top of the globe, and magnetic north, which is a point in the Arctic that the compass needle actually points towards. This difference is called variation. For a pilot flying on autopilot, the plane's advanced navigation computers automatically correct for this. But for a human flying manually and trusting their magnetic compass, they would unknowingly drift off course. Think of it like trying to drive in a perfectly straight line down a motorway while looking through a slightly distorted window. Without realizing it, you'd slowly drift into another lane. Now, imagine that over a flight of thousands of kilometers. That slight drift becomes a massive error. Hamad believes this is precisely what happened. Whether it was the pilot or a hijacker, the person at the controls was led astray by their own instruments, gradually steering the plane away from the path everyone assumed it took. This isn't just a hunch. Hamad has done the maths. He's calculated the exact drift for that night's specific conditions and combined it with fuel exhaustion models. His conclusion is staggering. He says this compass error means the entire official search area is wrong. The plane, he claims, is not in the deep mountainous seabed they've been scouring. Instead, his calculations point to a new, much more targeted corridor. He has narrowed the search to an area he says is just 10% the size of the original zone, a mere sliver of the ocean, located in a relatively shallow area off the coast of Perth, Australia. But Hamad also looked at the debris that washed ashore and found what he believes is another clue everyone else missed. The recovered pieces showed minimal corrosion and, crucially, no scorch marks or evidence of a high-speed fire or explosion. To a chief engineer, this suggests a different end. It points towards a controlled, gentler ditching on the ocean's surface, not a violent high-speed crash. And this, he argues, fits perfectly with his proposed landing zone. A controlled ditching would leave debris in a more concentrated area, and in shallower, calmer waters, it would be far more likely to remain detectable. After a decade of dead ends, this theory from a veteran engineer offers a tantalizing, and some would say heartbreakingly simple, solution. It suggests the answer was hiding in plain sight all along, not in complex satellite codes, but in the basic principles of flight that every pilot learns. So, with a compelling new theory on the table and families' hopes hanging by a thread, the world watched as the story took its most dramatic turn in years. In early 2025, a major announcement came from the Malaysian government. The Transport Minister, Anthony Loke, stood before the press and confirmed what so many had been praying for. the hunt for MH370 was back on. The Malaysian government had finalized an 18-month contract with the same private company that had tried before, Ocean Infinity, giving them a fresh mandate to solve the mystery once and for all. This wasn't just a fleeting effort. It was a committed, long-term operation, representing the most significant push for answers in nearly a decade. This new mission was also based on a no-find, no-fee agreement. The reported fee for success was set at $70 million, but if they found nothing, they would receive nothing. This high-stakes gamble meant the company was putting its money where its mouth was, investing millions of its own resources into the search because it truly believed it could succeed. Their target was a refined area of 15,000 square kilometers, a zone shaped by all the new data and analysis that had emerged over the long years, including the kind of groundbreaking theories proposed by experts like Ismail Hamad. This financial model removed the burden of cost from the taxpayers and placed it squarely on the company's ability to deliver a result, posing both a humanitarian mission and a colossal business risk. But this isn't the same search that was conducted back in 2018. The technology has taken a giant leap forward. Ocean Infinity's fleet is composed of the most advanced autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, in the world. Think of these not as clumsy remote-controlled toys, but as intelligent robotic scouts. They are launched from a mothership, but then they operate on their own, flying through the pitch-black depths like underwater drones in a coordinated swarm. They are equipped with incredibly powerful sonar systems that can map the seabed in stunning, high-resolution detail, capable of distinguishing a natural rock formation from a man-made object even under layers of sediment. They can navigate treacherous underwater mountains and canyons that would snag older equipment, and they can cover a staggering amount of territory every single day, working tirelessly in shifts. The entire mission hinges on the ability of these silent, electronic hunters to see what human eyes have never been able to, transforming the abyss into a detailed map in the mission control room. However, the path to discovery is never a straight line. In a reminder of just how challenging this environment is, reports emerged in April of 2025 that Ocean Infinity had temporarily suspended its active search operations. Now, this might sound like disappointing news, but it's actually a normal and calculated part of such a complex, long-duration operation. It doesn't mean they've given up, not at all. These pauses are often for crucial logistics, to refuel the main ship, to perform meticulous maintenance on the delicate AUVs after weeks of brutal work in the corrosive saltwater, or to analyze the immense and complex terabytes of data they have already collected. The southern Indian Ocean is notorious for its brutal weather, with windows of calm followed by periods of immense storms that would make launching and recovering the delicate robots impossible. The company and the Malaysian government have indicated that the mission is far from over and that operations are planned to resume when conditions allow before the end of the year. This brief pause is a tactical breath, not a surrender. It shows the world that this new search is a careful, determined process, a marathon, not a sprint. And it means that right now, the most promising lead in a decade is still being actively pursued, and the hope for a final, definitive answer remains brighter than it has been in years. Behind all the satellite data, the high-tech drones, and the complex theories, it is vital to remember the real, human heart of this tragedy. For over a decade, the families of the 239 people on board have been trapped in a unique and agonizing form of limbo. The utter lack of answers compounds their loss. Grace Nathan, whose mother was on the flight, has spoken of the emotional whiplash each new search brings, expressing a profound relief that the mission has resumed, but also the deep-seated fear of another disappointment. Her words echo a simple, universal need: the need to know, and the need to bring their loved ones home. For others, like Jaquita Gonzalez, whose husband was a crew member, the pain is even more fundamental. She has said that not knowing what happened to her husband is a form of torture that simply does not end. It is a wound that cannot heal because the most basic questions, where is he? What were his final moments, remain shrouded in mystery. This relentless, unanswered grief is the true weight of the MH370 mystery. It is the driving force behind every single search effort, the reason why governments and companies continue to spend millions, and the motivation for experts to keep thinking. This is why a theory like the one from Egypt Air's Ismail Hamad is so much more than just an engineering exercise. It represents a persistent, global refusal to give up. His claim that his insight could save millions in resources while delivering closure to anguished relatives perfectly encapsulates the ultimate goal here. It is not just about finding wreckage, it is about using every ounce of human ingenuity and compassion to end a decade of despair. The search for MH370 has become a race against time to provide peace to the living.